fact, as the new development bank representing BRICS countries, we believe the very establishment of the new development bank is giving effect to that intent which President Xi emphasized. The most important point is that the world is undergoing fundamental changes, and emerging markets now constitute 60% of global GDP. And therefore, global institutions, the entire framework of the international monetary system has to give effect to that more dominant role of emerging markets. There is no question that over the last 70 years, since the establishment of the Bretton Woods system after the Second World War, that there's been an imbalance in the power relations between the developed world, the large economies, industrialized economies like the United States, like Western Europe, and after the 1950s Japan, between those economies and the rest of the developing world. China at that time was still a very poor, underdeveloped country. Over the last 30 years, though, the world has changed fundamentally. Right? China has doubled its economy every 10 years over the last 30 years. India has grown exponentially over the last 20-25 years. So there has to be a process of reform to ensure that emerging markets have a bigger say in the running of the global economy. That is happening at various levels. It's happening in the G20, where many of the large emerging markets are playing a bigger role. So we are fully supportive of that endeavor.
I think emerging markets generally need to be better represented in global governance. So it has been the case, I think in earlier years, that some of the global institutions have been perhaps too Western dominated. That has changed in the past 7 or 8 years, and I think that there has been a shift, a realization from some of those bodies that they need to have greater involvement. If you look at the Financial Stability Board, if you look at the G20 and the broadening that's happened there, that has given emerging markets a greater voice than they've had before. That's very positive. At the same time, the growth of the starting up of the AIIB was an understandable response on behalf of China. But I think it's encouraging that not just China, but other emerging markets are now having a much greater say in global bodies and global governance.
Emerging markets have to show the world that their economies are not fragile, but are quite resilient. They are robust when it comes to be able to meet global challenges. And BRICS economies will always be defined not just by their growth rates, but they will be defined by the kind of momentum they can deliver in terms of inclusive development, in terms of comprehensive development of their economies, in terms of how they can improve their infrastructure, how they can indulge in capacity building, and more importantly, how they can deal with the unequal distribution of wealth that creates a lot of problems. But there's no doubt that if they can continue down this path and work more cohesively and more collectively, as a grouping, they can become a very prominent voice in shaping the international architecture, not just in political terms or diplomatic terms, but more importantly in terms of global finance and the world economy. And that obviously will have a very important role to play in the restructuring of the IMF and the World Bank, for example, going forward.
For a long time, the major global institutions, the IMF, and the World Bank, and others, were very much totally dominated by the advanced countries. And you had a situation where even some of the very small advanced countries like Belgium, were having as much voting power as some of the huge emerging market countries. I think the global financial institutions have taken a little bit of time to catch up with the new realities of the world economy, in the sense that China is now the world's second largest economy, the largest on some measures in terms of GDP. And yet the global institutions are still very focused on the Western economies. I think it's important that there is a reorientation in order to encompass China and other major emerging markets in a way that more fairly reflects their new expanded role in the world economy. So there's been some progress on that, but there's still quite a long way to go. And I think that's the point that the President is trying to make, that there needs to be more of a recognition of the role of the major emerging markets now in the global economy, which is huge in the global financial institutions, and the global financial architecture needs to be less focused on the richest countries.